One of the most exciting parts of March of the Machines is the addition of the new battle card type to the game. We got 36 of them coming in the set, and today we're going to tier list them all based on their potential for 60 card constructed formats. Before we jump into it though, a little bit of bookkeeping. First, how do you actually grade a battle? Battles are double face cards. You get the front side right away, and then if you defeat the battle by removing all of its defense counters, you get to cast the back side. So we are grading our battles in 3 ways. Number 1, what's the power of the front side? That's the side you're always going to get. Does the front side of the battle compare favorably to a sorcery with a similar effect? Is it on rate? Is it overcosted? Is it as powerful as a similar sorcery would be? So that's number 1. Number 2, how easy is it to defeat the battle? Can you actually flip it and get the backside? This is mostly a product of how many defense counters a battle has, which ranges from 3 all the way up to 7. So obviously 3 defense counters is going to be easier to defeat than one with 7 defense counters, although there's some other considerations as well, like does the battle make creatures? If your battle makes creatures with its front side, those creatures can attack the battle and flip it. Does your battle act as removal? Because that's getting a blocker out of the way that could stop you from flipping the battle. Finally, what is the power of the backside? Is the backside of the battle actually strong enough that sometimes at least you're going to be willing to throw some damage at this battle to try to flip it and get the backside? Is it worth trying to do that? So that's how we're grading the battle. Finally, our actual tier list. So S tier is multi-format staples. If a card is only good in standard or only good in modern or pioneer, it's not going to be an S tier. You can be super good in one format and not make it there, but if you have potential to be good in more than one 60 card format, that's a S tier battle. A tier battles are very good in at least one format. So if you're really good in standard or really good in modern, you'd be an A tier battle. B tier is average battles. It could see play in the right deck, in the right meta. They definitely have a chance, but they're also not guaranteed to be staples or anything like that. C tier battles are below average, probably unlikely to really see play, but never say never. D tier battles are bad battles, like super fringe, probably not even good enough for standard. And then F tier battles are the straight up fail battles. These are the why would I ever possibly put this battle in my deck battles. So that's how we're grading battles. That's how our tiers work. So before we jump into it, one more quick reminder. If you need some of these battles, you can snag them from our sponsor Card Kingdom over at cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish. Anyway, let's tier rank all the new battles from March of the Machines. Battle number 1, we have Invasion of Alara. And Invasion of Alara is actually one of my sleeper picks for Pioneer and maybe even Modern. The front side seems fairly costed. 5 mana to pseudo cascade and also draw a card is about right, and it just oozes value, and most importantly, it naturally synergizes with Yard in Pioneer and also in Explorer. And I think this might actually be at its best in Explorer. In Pioneer proper, it's kind of competing with Bring to Light a little bit in 5-color Yarion decks, but in Explorer, there's no Bring to Light yet. So this seems like a pretty sweet replacement that isn't as consistent because you don't get to just directly tutor out whatever you want, but it does offer even more value. And in Pioneer, I think this could show up alongside Bring to Light. Also worth mentioning, this is another card that can cheat a Tibble into play. You cascade or pseudo cascade into Velki, but since it's not technically cascade, you can cast the Tibble side. The backside is technically a million for one, but 7 defense counters is a ton. I'm honestly more excited just about leaving the front side on the battlefield to blink with Yarion, but adding this all together, I think that Invasion of Alara is solidly an A tier battle. We also have Invasion of Amonkhet. Invasion of Amonkhet, the front side is technically a 2-for-1. Your opponent discards, you draw, plus you get some upside in a self-mill or graveyard deck because you're filling the graveyards. The backside also really synergizes with the Reanimator plan. You can potentially mill over your Atraxa or mill over your Titan of Industry, and maybe you don't find a reanimation spell, but you can flip the battle and use the backside to copy your reanimation target while you're waiting to find your reanimation effect. In 4 defense counters, not a super high number. The lowest we've seen is 3, so 4 seems pretty reasonable. I could see this card being looking pretty good in a standard deck looking to reanimate Atraxa. The only question is, do you have room for it alongside some really powerful 3-drops like Corpse Appraiser and Fable the Mirror Breaker? Worst case, even if this doesn't take off in standard right away, I think it should probably have a chance after rotation, which I think puts it pretty solidly in the B tier. Next up is Invasion of Arcavios. Tutoring from your sideboard is powerful. It's the reason that Karn the Great Creator is so busted in various formats, but the easiest way to evaluate the front side of a battle is just compare it to a sorcery, and from this perspective, Invasion of Arcavios is overcosted by at least 1 and maybe 2 mana. Just see Cunning Wish and Burning Wish and Mastermind's Acquisition and solve the equation. Having an overcosted front side isn't necessarily a deal breaker for a battle, assuming the backside is a worthwhile payoff and it's relatively easy to flip, but Invasion of Arcavios fails here as well. 7 defense counters is a huge number, tied for the most on any battle, and if you flip it, you get a Swarm Intelligence, which is powerful, but still, if you want enchantment that copies all your spells, it's probably just better to cut out the middleman and play a Swarm Intelligence. It's possible there's some wild Elian Trazi combo deck that can take advantage of Invasion of Arcavios, which keeps it from being rated even lower, but I think overall, Invasion of Arcavios looks like a Spellslinger commander card rather than his 60 card constructed staple, so I'm gonna stick it in the C tier. We also got Invasion of Osglow, and the front side on this one is already pretty good. 2 mana for an Edict that forces your opponent to sacrifice a creature or a planeswalker and gives you bonus damage is already on rate, so there could be some standard decks, especially if they care about the battle type, playing it just as a okay removal spell. On the other hand, the backside is downright weak. Constructed decks are not really going to want to send 4 damage at this to get a 2-1 that might slowly grow, so I don't think you're going to be flipping this battle, but still, I think it goes solidly in the B tier, just because there's probably some standard decks that'll just play it as a decent removal spell. Next up is Invasion of Belenin, which is essentially Wedding Announcement at home. If that home is Savan down by the river, it's so bad. So 3 mana for a 2/2 is just not up to snuff in standard. And then the backside, what aggro deck is going to want to send 5 damage at this to flip into a Glorious Anthem? The only thing that keeps this out of the straight up F tier is it does make a Knight, which could be relevant. There are a lot of Knight synergies in standard, but this one goes in the D tier, and I would be very surprised if 60 card formats played it. Next on our list, Invasion of Dominaria. Invasion of Dominaria isn't good. I mean, 3 mana to gain 4 life and draw a card, not an exciting Magic card, but we have seen similar cards in the past, like Ritual of Rejuvenation, Revitalize, occasionally see play in control decks looking to stabilize against aggro. Sadly, control decks are some of the worst decks for flipping battles, since they usually don't play that many creatures, which means this Sarah Angel backside is probably not going to show up too often, which means that this card is likely just worse than Sunset Revelry or Union of the Third Path in the decks that might want it. So a little bit worse than the other options out there, probably not going to see any play. Puts it in the D tier for me. Next on our battle list is Invasion of Eldraine, which puts us in a bit of a prickle. The front side is 4 mana for a Mind Rot, and we've recently seen what a playable Mind Rot looks like, and it's 3 mana, and it has a Tormod's Crypt attached, and that is go blank. So 4 mana discard is usually just too slow for constructed formats. On the other hand, the backside gives you a cool, like, pseudo rack effect on a creature. In formats with the literal rack, this isn't going to matter, but I don't know, maybe there's some discard deck in, like, Explore or Historic, which doesn't have access to the rack itself, that could play it for the backside. But still, how's an 8 rack style discard deck ever gonna flip this card, which I guess means it's pretty solidly in the D tier. On the other hand, we got some really good uncommon battles in this set, like Invasion of Urgamon. Invasion of Urgamon is a battle that actually has a lot of implications just because of the front side. Looting and making a treasure for 2 mana, or I guess technically rummaging and making a treasure for 2 mana, is actually just really strong in a reanimation deck. On turn 2, you can discard your Atraxa and ramp into your reanimation spell I heard earlier. It's also in the right colors for something like Jund Windgrace that also likes getting cards in the graveyard early in the game. Well, I guess you could technically try to flip it into a 3/4, and I'm sure there'll be some situations where that's right. I think this will be at its best in decks that just play the front side like a sorcery to fill the graveyard and ramp and set up the reanimation. Also could work in older formats where it synergizes with Indomitable Creativity or looting through your deck to find your payoff and also adding an artifact to the battlefield. battlefield. To me, this puts Invasion of Urgamon solidly in the A tier, and a card that is likely to be pretty standard playable and might have some fringe eternal upside if you squint hard enough. We also got Invasion of Fiora. There might be some arguments for putting Invasion of Fiora in the S tier. The problem is, I can't really figure out a non-standard deck that would want the 6-mana Wrath. Its best bet is probably Pioneer or Explorer, which doesn't have great black Wraths, and this card does synergize with Nykthos, adding black pips to the battlefield, or Yarion to blink it. The good news is, even if Invasion of Fiora doesn't make it outside of standard, this seems like one of the best battles for standard, whereas 6-mana Wrath with upside and some flexibility is already pretty solid, and there's natural top tier homes thanks to the popularity of black decks in the format and various legend themed decks that can turn Invasion of Fiora into a literal plague win where you Wrath all your opponent's stuff and keep all your stuff. While the front side is good enough to see play on its own, the fact that it only has 4 defense counters makes it relatively easy to flip. A single Shieldred attack can get the job done, and the backside actually offers a really powerful creature that can defeat a battle or kill a planeswalker every single attack and maybe generate some card advantage as well. So since Invasion of Fiora doesn't actually have much non-standard potential, we can't really put it in the S tier, but I think this is a very solid A tier battle that is likely to see a ton of play in standard. Next up, we got our first S tier battle in Invasion of Gabakhan, and this card, it just seems designed to make waves in 60 card formats. The front side is basically the closest thing we've seen to a white Thoughtseize, letting an aggro deck slow down a sweep or a combo piece from an opponent, and the backside can easily and quickly snowball into a victory in a go wide aggro deck. Most importantly, it only has 3 defense counters, making it tied for the easiest battle to defeat, which means flipping it shouldn't be that much of an issue in the decks that would want it that are going to be full of creatures. Even better, the backside triggers on your end step, so you immediately start generating value, which gives the card a leg up on some other battles which flip into a creature that need to survive a turn to do anything. I expect Invasion of Gabakhan will be a standard staple in white aggro decks like soldiers and humans and knights, and should have a chance to break into Pioneer and maybe even Modern, both of which also have top tier white weenie decks. So I think this card has enough implications across formats. It is very clearly belonging in the S tier. Next up, we got Invasion of Ikoria. Invasion of Ikoria is one of the battles I'm most excited for in non-standard formats. The front side is essentially Finale of Devastation, which is already a very playable card. Yeah, you get the random Ikorian downside of not hitting creatures, but the upside of adding 2 green mana symbols to the battlefield, which matters in decks like Mono Green Devotion, helps make up for this. This alone should be enough to let the card see play in Creature Toolbox and maybe Devotion decks. The backside offers a pretty solid creature. An 8/8 with reach that gives your entire team weird evasion is what, probably a 7 mana card, and you're getting this for 2 mana and 6 damage. That seems pretty strong as well. The other reason to be hyped about this card specifically for Modern is that it combos with Vampire Hexmage. For 4 mana, you 2-drop Vampire Hexmage, and then you can immediately sack it to defeat the battle and add the 8/8 Zatortha to the battlefield. While a 4 mana 8/8 isn't breaking Modern or anything, it seems pretty good. The only annoying downside is the backside will still technically have a mana value of 2, which does make the massive dinosaur a little bit susceptible to removal like Fatal Push or March of Otherworldly Light or Prismatic Ending, but still, if your opponent doesn't have an immediate answer, they're going to lose the game super quickly to the backside. So good value card and combo potential, that's enough upside to easily put Invasion of Ikoria in the S tier. Next we have Invasion of Innistrad. Invasion of Innistrad is a puzzling battle. In Innistrad Crimson Vow last year, we got a card called Bleed Dry, which is a random forgettable common that does literally the same thing as the front side of Invasion of Innistrad, except you get the upside of exiling the creature that it kills. We also have cards like Tragic Slip or Tragic Fall, which do the same thing for 1 or 2 mana if you meet their conditions. As a result, the front side of Invasion of Innistrad looks pretty bad at first glance. It's just way too much mana for a removal spell, but considering that Wizards put this card at Mythic, I keep wondering if I'm missing something, and maybe it's way stronger than it looks. I guess the ability to flash this in on your opponent's end step and kill a blocker and then hopefully defeat the battle could be powerful, although this still requires playing a 4 mana removable spell and then dealing 5 damage to the battle, and then the backside, it's okay. Like, you get a Moan of the Unhollow making 2/2/2 zombies, and then some really slow graveyard hate and the ability to maybe make more 2/2s for 3, which I guess it's value, but it's not busted. It does have some zombie tribal synergies. Zombies haven't really taken off in standard, although a lot of pieces are there, so maybe that's a chance for it to see play. I really am tempted to drop this battle in the F tier, which is probably a bit too harsh. I think I'm going to play it safe and put it in the C tier, because I just can't shake the feeling that this is going to be one of those battles that at first glance looks pretty bad, but then plays way stronger once we actually see it on the battlefield. Next up, we have Invasion of Ixalan. Invasion of Ixalan is weird. It is like the most averagest of battles. 2 mana to dig 5 card deeps for a permanent. That's a fine rate if that's something your deck wants to do. Would be better if the cards went into your graveyard rather than back into your library. Would make it a replacement potentially for something like Grizzly Salvage. But just how many decks are looking to pay a 2 mana tax to dig for a permanent? That's kind of the issue. The backside, a 4/3 Trampler, which will probably be indestructible during your turn, is also fine but not exciting, kind of gets stonewalled by Shieldred. To me, this leaves Invasion of Ixalan is a solid B tier battle. Like, you could jam this in any deck with a lot of permanents, and it's gonna be fine, but it's also not the kind of battle that you build your deck around or is really gonna change the way your deck plays. We also got Invasion of Kaladesh. 2 mana to make a 1/1 Thopter with flying is about 1 mana too much, and while the backside is potentially powerful, the vehicle can have a lot of power, it does need a heavy artifact deck to take advantage of it. I don't think it's impossible that some artifact beatdown style deck emerges that could make use of Invasion of Kaladesh. There are a lot of good support pieces for some sort of artifact beatdown from the Brothers War, like Urza for example, and Invasion of Kaladesh could be part of a deck like that, although I expect it would be more of a role player than a foundation in the deck, and it's possible that it wouldn't even make the cut. So this uncertainty sticks Invasion of Kaladesh right into the C tier. We also got Invasion of Kaldheim. Invasion of Kaldheim is a really unique card. The front side looks like a overcosted self-wheel, but when you consider that you get access to all the cards you wheel away for 1 extra turn, it might actually be the right cost for the effect. There's a little bit of memory jar vibes with this one, because we've just never seen this effect before. 4 defense counters is fine, that's on the low end of the battle's range, and the backside is incredibly powerful. It's an upgraded Seismic Assault, which can be a combo piece or simply a way to prevent flood in an aggro deck by letting you discard your extra lands for some damage and some additional cards. When I first saw Invasion of Kaldheim, I probably would have put it in the A tier, but the more I thought about it, the more my faith wavered. In standard, my big concern is Shieldred, which is really punishing against mass card draw effects like this. Wheeling away your hand and getting some new cards sounds nice until you have to take 10 damage from Shieldred to do this. Basically the same reason I've stopped playing Phyrexian Arena in standard. It's just too risky with Shieldred in so many decks. In modern, the card could be a Seismic Assault replacement, and it does have some huge upsides, like only requiring 1 red mana, even though it does cost 1 more mana overall. But is it going to be fast enough? The front side by itself isn't good enough for modern. So if you're playing this, your plan's going to be to play it and flip it to get the Seismic Assault side. I guess 1 attack from a Swans or Tarmogoyf for Slogurk should get the job done, but what if your board is empty? I think players will try this as a Seismic Assault replacement, but whether it actually ends up being better than Seismic Assault in a format like modern remains to be seen. Oh yeah, as far as using it to hit our Swans and draw some cards, there's actually a big problem here. I don't think you can play this in Seismic Swans combo, because the way the combo works is you end up essentially drawing your entire deck, and the fact that the backside is always going to exile a card when you activate it probably means that you mill yourself out before you complete the Swans combo. So I'm going to put Invasion of Kaldheim in the B tier. I think this card has a chance to see play from standard all the way back to modern, but there are some concerns that make me wonder just how good it'll actually be in practice. We also got Invasion of Kamigawa, and I gotta say, Wizards played it super safe with uncommon removal battles. I mean, this is 4 mana to stun a creature for the turn. I guess Wizards was probably worried about limited in the play pattern of someone like playing a battle to get a blocker out of the way and immediately flipping it, which I guess in limited could actually be a problem. Sadly, it means this card and a lot of these these uncommon removal battles have zero chance to see constructed play. The front sides are just way too expensive, and the back sides aren't strong enough to make up for it. So Invasion of Kamigawa, pretty safely at the F tier. We also got another rare red battle, an Invasion of Karsus. Compared to other similar sweepers, the front side of Invasion of Karsus is 1 mana more than you'd expect. It essentially has a 1 mana battle tax. This means if you're gonna play Invasion of Karsus over other options like Brotherhood End or Anger of the Gods, the backside is gonna have to make up for this slight inefficiency. The good news is Invasion of Karsus should be a pretty easy battle to flip, especially if you build your deck around it, in part because it only has 4 defense counters, and in part because you can use it to sweep small blockers out of the way, letting you attack the battle with a big creature to flip it immediately. Speaking of big creatures, the backside of the card's actually pretty solid. If 4/4 is fine, even if it's a bit sad against Sheoldred, and the ability to shock something whenever you cast a spell should be able to close out the game super quickly, assuming you have some cards in hand. Sure, you're giving up 4 damage to get Refraction Elemental, but I think it should more than make up for this with just 1 turn on the battlefield, which should make defeating this battle worthwhile pretty often. So I think there's an argument for putting it in the A tier, but its inefficiency compared to Brotherhood End gives me pause. So we're gonna stick it in the B tier, although I will say, I think it's more likely that I'm underrating it than that I'm overrating it. We also got a Boros uncommon battle, an Invasion of Clem. Yes, it's cute that pumping your creatures can help you flip the battle. Sure, the tokens on the backside have decent stats, especially if you can grow them by attacking with other creature tokens. The problem is, it's 4 mana and sorcery speed to pump your creatures. That's just not a constructed playable effect. In standard, 4 mana buys you a Sheoldred or Wandering Emperor. Giving 2 creatures +2/+0 until end of turn just isn't gonna cut it. This one is way down in the F tier for constructed, although probably fine for limited. Speaking of uncommon battles, next up we have Invasion of Lorwyn, and I honestly don't know what Lorwyn did to piss Wizards off, but it must have been something pretty big because wow did they get the worst battle, and it's not even close. 6 mana to kill a creature at sorcery speed is already bad, but Invasion of Lorwyn actually has multiple additional restrictions. It can't hit elves, you gotta have a bunch of lands. Sure, the backside could be a big creature if you manage to defeat it, but considering it costs 6 mana and then 5 damage to flip it to get a Winnowing Forces, you're not really getting much of a discount compared to like a Beanstalk Giant or Cultivator Colossus. So the fact that the front side is just so incredibly slow and overcosted definitely puts this one down in the F tier. We also got Invasion of Mercadia. So Invasion of Mercadia, it's essentially the battle version of Bitter Reunion, a card that has actually seen a decent amount of play, except the problem is the ability to give all your creatures haste is probably more of an upside for most decks than potentially flipping into a 3/3 creature that's fairly expensive to activate. So I think this might be a fine card that's just a little bit worse than another card that already exists in standard. That said, it is a battle and it does fill your graveyard and it is cheap, so maybe there's some relevance in card type matters decks. Like you can find this as a battle with a Troxo, and Bitter Reunion you might not be able to, or maybe Growing Tarmogoyf in some format. So I guess the potential in card type matters decks puts it in the C tier, but I'm not expecting too much from this one just because I think Bitter Reunion is mostly better. We also got Invasion of Mog. Invasion of Mog is solid support for the +1/+1 counter theme in March of the Machines Limited, but in Constructed, there's cards like Broker's Ascendancy or Felidar Retreat that can put a +1/+1 counter on our entire team every turn, which is way more upside than potentially flipping into a 3/3 creature. So Limited, it's probably fine, but for Constructed, this is F tier. We got better options in literally every format. Next on our list of Wizards was really scared of uncommon removal battles for limited, we have Invasion of Murganda, which is another waste of cardboard. A playable version of this effect for Constructed would be something like Dramoka's Command, which is 2 mana in instant speed to put counters on your stuff and fight something. Invasion of Murganda is 5 mana in sorcery speed. The creature on the backside is fine, but for a battle to have a chance in Constructed formats, the front side needs to be at least somewhat playable on its own, and this is where their Invasion of Morganda fails. So again, probably fine for limited, but for constructed, another F tier uncommon battle. Next up, we have Invasion of New Capenna. Invasion of New Capenna is interesting. The front side is essentially a worse Rite of Oblivion, but that's still a decent removal spell for a deck that has Sacrifice Fodder. It only has 4 defense counters, which means you should be able to flip it pretty easily, which is good. Speaking of the backside, I think the equipment is actually sneakily strong. It reads like a card for tribal decks, and you can play it in tribal decks, but I actually think it'll be at its best in token strategies, which tend to accidentally have a lot of creatures of the same type because of how tokens work. I can imagine a deck built around Oni called Anvil, Lingering Soul, Skrell 5, making good use of this card. In the early game, you can cash in one of your tokens to use this as removal, and then later, after flipping it, you can grow your team really quickly with only a single mana equip cost. The only real drawback of the card is if you flip it during combat, you're not going to get the first trigger to start growing your team with Holy Frazzle Cannon until the next turn, which makes it a lot worse than something like Invasion of Gabakhan, which starts giving you the counters right away once you flip it. But I could still see this card showing up in competitive standard decks, if not now, then after Rite of Oblivion rotates, which puts it easily in the B tier. Next up, we have Invasion of New Phyrexia. While I'm not expecting Invasion of New Phyrexia to show up outside of standard, to me this looks like one of the best battles for standard, even discounting the Night Tribal sub-theme of March of the Machines. The front side is basically Finale of Glory. There isn't any tax for being a battle on this one. And flipping this seems pretty easy. Yes, 6 defense counters is a lot, but you gotta remember, this is gonna be adding a bunch of 2/2s to the battlefield, which you can use to help defeat the battlefield. So that number is actually a lot lower than it looks at first glance. I actually think in the mid to late game, this should be one of the easiest battles to flip. You play it, you make a bunch of knights, the next turn you attack it with the knights and flip it, and then the backside hits a very strong card. It flips into a new Teferi Planeswalker, so it's definitely worth soaking some damage into this to get it, and the Teferi synergizes well with the front side. You can use it to pump your knights with the emblem, or worst case, you draw cards or use it as removal, which is exactly what you want out of a Planeswalker. So I don't think this can really show up outside of standard. In standard, I expect this one to see a lot of play, putting it easily in the A tier. Next up, we have Invasion of Perulia, and this is one of my sleeper picks for battles from the set. When I first saw the card, it didn't excite me, but then the more I thought about how many powerful double face cards we have in standard, most of March of the Machines, Fable, the Mirror Breaker, Wedding Announcement, the more I began to like this card. Playing this for 2 mana to scry 3 and draw land, that's not all that exciting, but 2 mana scry 3 and draw Wedding Announcement or Fable, the Mirror Breaker that you can play the following turn, that actually seems like a pretty powerful card. And then the backside of the battle is decent as well. Yes, standard is a tough place for a 4/4 thanks to Shieldred, but giving all of your transform permanents Ward 2 is actually pretty nice protection for your Wedding Announcements and Fable the Mirror Breakers. While I don't think the Invasion of Perulia is format defining or anything like that, it does seem like the card could be a solid role player thanks to how many powerful double face cards currently exist in standard, which to me puts it right in the B tier. Next up, we have our colorless battle, Invasion of Ravnica. So Invasion of Ravnica, it is a tricky battle to grade. It's in the conversation for best colorless removal spell of all time, which is notable, although just how much that actually matters in 60 card formats is up for debate. Yes, it's colorless, but 5 mana to exile most non-land permanents is still a lot in an absolute sense. But if you're a color that struggles to find hard removal, it could be worth it. In some ways, this is the card that would have been even more exciting a few years ago. We're currently in the era of color pie expansion. Now black can kill enchantments, blue can exile artifacts, which makes cards like this a little bit less important since less colors struggle to get things off the battlefield. And remember, we're ranking these battles based on 60 card constructed formats where you can always just splash a color. We're not ranking them by commander, where the harsh color identity rules makes this card way more important. Still, we we've seen decks make good use of Mightstone and Weakstone, and Invasion of Ravnica is even more flexible in some ways, getting rid of Wedding Announcements, Fable of the Mirror Breakers, Eternal Wanderers, along with most creatures. I could see decks in older formats like Tron maybe try to make use of it. They make a lot of mana, but they don't have great removal options, so they could be in the market for Invasion of Ravnica. Compounding the trickiness of grading this card is the backside is kind of the opposite of the front side. The front side offers the most value to monocolored or colorless decks that don't have good removal options, while the backside wants a ton of multicolor or specifically 2-color cards. Think of a Niv Mizzet Reborn deck, essentially. That's more or less the kind of deck that would take advantage of Guildpact Paragon. Actually, as odd as it sounds, maybe the best home for Invasion of Ravnica is in a Niv to Light style deck in Pioneer or in Explorer. Sure, the front side is a Nanba with Niv, you're not going to find it with Niv, but it is great with Yarion that's often used as a companion, and Niv or Omnath can flip the battle in just one attack, and once you get a Guildpact Paragon on the battlefield, it's basically a backup Niv. You're going to generate an absurd amount of card advantage as you're casting your 2-color cards. So all things considered, I think you can argue that Invasion of Ravnica is anywhere from a B to A tier. I'm going to aim high and put it in A tier, but if you put it in B, I wouldn't complain. We also got Invasion of Ragatha. So Invasion of Ragatha, it's a pretty lackluster burn spell. Only one of its damage hits a creature, so it's more of a lava axe than a removal spell. Although there might be one scenario where it could be pretty strong, which is in a dedicated battle deck. 4 damage to another battle is enough to flip a lot of the strongest battles without attacking them. Although Stoke the Flame might just be a better way to do this, or a more playable way to do this. The other possibility is playing Invasion of Ragatha in a dedicated burn deck, where the backside actually is really powerful with Play with Fire, Lightning Strike. The backside is kind of a weird twist on Torbrand, Thane of Redfell, but only for non-combat damage. But I'm not sure that a burn deck wants to spend 5 damage worth of burn to flip into a creature that will power up their future burn, but how much burn is going to be left in your hand if you send 5 of that at the battle itself? So I think the card's interesting in burn or battle decks, but I would expect that this is one of those like 61st cards where you try it and you're like, oh, it's like close to being good, but just not quite good enough, which leads to me putting it in the C tier. Next up, we have Invasion of Segovia, and this is a card I've really come around on. So the front side, making 2 1/1s at sorcery speed for 3 mana, that's about a mana too much. The going rate is 2 mana, see Raise the Alarm and a bunch of other cards. But Invasion of Segovia does get some bonus points for being one of the easier battles to flip. It's only 4 defense counters, and the front side has bodies to the battlefield you can use to attack the battle. The backside, while just a 3/3, I think is actually one of the most powerful backsides on any of the battles in the right deck. So let's say you're playing a go wide token style deck. The ability to convoke out all your non-creature spells is absolutely absurd. You can cast some token makers, use the token from the token makers to cast more token makers, and then on your end step you get to untap 4 creatures, which you can use to convoke during your opponent's turn to cast a counter spell for free. So I feel like flipping this is actually a really strong payoff. The play pattern of being able to dump your hand during your turn and then leave up interaction during your opponent's turn is actually really good. So I think you basically have to be a token deck to take advantage of this, but in a standard token deck, or maybe even outside of standard, I think the backside is just so ridiculously pushed that I'm gonna put this in the A tier, which I'm actually kind of surprised about, because if you had asked me about this a week ago, it would probably be in the C to D tier based on the fact that the front side is a mana too much, but the backside has potential to play so strong that I think it mostly makes up for it. Next up, we have Invasion of Chandalar. Invasion of Chandalar, it looks like one of the most fun battles to play. Who doesn't like returning big things from your graveyard and then putting huge permanents into play from your hand for free? But is it a good card? And that question is kinda tough. Returning 3 permanents from your hand to your graveyard for 5 mana is actually a good rate. It's better than like Restock, although it's been a while since I've seen Restock show up in competitive decks. Surprisingly, it doesn't have any restrictions on what permanents you can regrowth, which means in a graveyard deck you can set up some pretty pretty absurd value loops where you like play this to get back another copy of it and 2 other permanents, and play the second copy to get back a bunch of other permanents. So in our current grindy standard, I could see that having a lot of value. You could also potentially use the front side to return your big finishers. Like you aggressively self-mill, cast your Invasion of Chandelar, get back a portal to Phyrexia or Atraxa or something, then flip your invasion and start dumping those things into play for free, which seems ridiculous. The bad news is green has been the worst color in standard, and there is a lot of random graveyard hate. You look at Graveyard Trespasser and Friends, a lot of good cards just accidentally hit on your graveyard. So that's kind of the drawback. Although on the other hand, there are a lot of good pieces to make graveyard decks work in standard, and those decks would be the best home for Invasion of Chandelar. But so far we haven't seen Urborg Glorgoyf and Old Stick Fingers take over the format. I'm going to put this one in the B tier, but I think there's a lot of variance here. I could see this with how grindy standard is, moving up the ranks to A or maybe even S, or I could see this card kind of flopping because there's so much graveyard hate and the graveyard decks remain to not be that good and fall down to C or even D tier. But for now, let's stick it in the B tier. Next up, we have Invasion of Tarkir. And Invasion of Tarkir, its power is almost solely dependent on the number of dragons in your deck. 2 mana sorcery speed shock is just straight up bad. But if you have 1 or 2 dragons in hand, the rate of this as a burn spell actually becomes pretty good. And then assuming you're playing a dragon deck, defeating the battle should be pretty easy because you're gonna have a bunch of big flyers, and your reward is a pretty strong dragon. A 4/4 that lets all your other dragons shock when they attack should be able to close out the game super quickly, and also has some neat synergies in a battle world, because one of the challenges of battles is you got to choose where to put your damage. Do you hit your opponent? Do you try to flip a battle? Well, once you flip Invasion of Tarkir, you can use the backside to let all your dragons attack your opponent's face and then shock down the battles to still flip your battle, so you get the best of both worlds. So I think in a dragon deck, this card is awesome, like an S tier battle. On the other hand, no format actually has a competitive dragon deck at the moment, so because it doesn't have a clear home, we're gonna have to put it in B tier. But keep it in mind, if you're building dragons and you're getting 3 or 4 damage out of its ETB, the card is really good. We also got Invasion of Theros, and this is a tricky one. The front side is okay. It's a 3 mana narrow tutor, although if you're trying to tutor up an Aura God, there's just more efficient or more flexible options out there. On the other hand, the backside, New Alara, is one of the strongest enchantresses we've ever seen. A 4/4 lifelinking indestructible creature, assuming you have 3 enchantments, which if you're playing this card, you should be an enchantress deck, is actually a really strong creature, and then you get to draw a card whenever you play an enchantment. In non-standard formats, I think this card's probably just too slow. If you think about like Boggles or Srom Aura style decks, those decks are all about being as low to the ground and fast as possible. I don't think you can afford to spend 3 mana to tutor up an Aura that you're going to play the next turn. It's just a little bit too much. On the other hand, in standard, things are a lot different. We already have a couple of different enchantment decks that are pretty good, built around cards like Hallowed Haunting, and you could easily run Invasion of Tarkir even without a ton of auras. Like, stick 1 Heliod the Radiant Dawn in your deck, and then Ossification will be your main aura, and that's probably enough to make it worth it, just because the backside of Farah is so strong. Like, unless your opponent has a Farewell or a Sunfall, the backside is straight up gonna win the game. So I think its standard potential for Enchantress decks puts it up in the B tier, and if it somehow manages to find its way into Modern or Pioneer, it could go even higher, because the backside is just such a strong effect. We also got Invasion of Telvanna. So 5 mana to reanimate a permanent is the going rate. See Obsidat's Aid or Invoke Justice. 5 mana is also the going rate to reanimate Atraxa in standard. See Cruelty of Gix. So the front side of Invasion of Telvanna seems very fairly priced. Like, if this was a sorcery with no backside, I think it would cost 5 mana. It would be exactly the same. So as a result, the possibility of defeating the battle and flipping it and getting a souped up Bitter Blossom is kind of just free upside. My expectation is this is strong enough to see play just as a reanimation spell for decks that don't really plan on flipping it, and then sometimes the situation's going to be right that you flip it and it gives you some protection from a wrath because you have this enchantment that's making creatures, but I think this ends up being an A tier battle based on the reanimating front side alone. We also got Invasion of Elgrotha. Lightning Helix is 2 mana in instant speed. That is the constructed playable rate for dealing 3 damage and gaining 3 life. Invasion of Elgrotha is 5 mana at sorcery speed. Because the front side's so overcosted, this could flip into literal Oko Thief of Crowns, and I don't think it would actually be very good. And it definitely doesn't flip into Oko. It flips into a random 3/3 flyer with some upside. So the fact that the front side is just way overcosted puts this one down in the F tier near the bottom of the list. We also got Invasion of Vryn. So the front side is shift, draw 3, and discard 1, which isn't really a constructed playable card. While it's not horrible, it's not something you really actively want to have in your deck, especially in a Sheoldred standard. The backside, on the other hand, is actually pretty sweet. Being able to copy any spell you control for 1 mana is a really exciting rate. If you think about it, Lithiform Engine costs 4 mana to do the same thing, although Lithiform Engine is repeatable. You can do it every single turn. When the backside of this Overloaded Mage Ring is a one-shot, is the backside strong enough to make it worth playing the overcosted front side and then sending 4 damage at Invasion of Vryn? I think the answer is generally going to be no, but it seems like a really fun card, and I could see some deck playing it as a one-of or something, so we're going to stick it in the D tier. We also got Invasion of Xeres, which is the last of our overcosted uncommon removal battles. So 4 mana to bounce a single creature. It's really bad. That should be 1 mana at instant speed. Look at Unsummon. So this is a huge tax on the effect. My first thought was to dump this in the F tier alongside all the other bad removal uncommon battles, but there is one tiny thing that makes me want to put it in D tier, which is there is a really slow loop with Yarion where you like play this to bounce something, then you can play Yarion to blink this, then you can use this to bounce the Yarion, then play Yarion to blink your entire board, and that can bounce Yarion. It's a ridiculous amount of mana. To go through the loop, it's 9 mana to blink your board every turn, which probably means this isn't playable, but yeah, could it show up as a one-of in some sort of Yarion deck? Maybe. So we're gonna break the mold here and put this one in the D tier, even though there's a realistic chance it deserves to be alongside all these other uncommon removal battles in the F tier. Last but not least, we got Invasion of Zendikar. Invasion of Zendikar, one of the best commander battles, although we're not talking about commander today. The good news about this card for 60 card formats is there's no battle tax. 4 mana to tutor up 2 lands on the battlefield at sorcery speed. That's what it costs to do that. So you're not paying any extra because this is a battle, and it does only take 3 defense counters to flip it. So this is one of the easiest battles to flip, which is also really solid. And then the backside is a fine creature as a 4/4 that can make some mana. So every piece of this battle is good. The only question is, what 60 card constructed decks want an explosive vegetation? What deck wants to just tutor 2 lands on the battlefield? And the answer is there's not a ton. I could certainly see a ramp deck developing where this is going to be one of the best cards in the deck and going to see super heavy play, but it's not something you just jam in any deck for value. So even though every single mark on this card, its front side rate, its flippability, its backside is really good, it's hard for me to put it above the B tier just because explosive vegetation isn't a card most standard or modern or pioneer decks will want. So anyway, that is my battle tier list. What do you think? What do you think? How do you rank the battles for Constructed? Let me know in the comments. And also, I made this little tier list thing. I will stick this in the description of the video. So if you want to mess around with it and do your own tier list and share it with me, definitely do that. It would be super cool to see what everyone else thinks. So anyway, everyone, thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will talk to you soon. Looking for even more Magic? Well, check out our video ranking every single win the game card in Magic, or maybe the one about the biggest cheaters who've ever played the game.